Right, in any phylogenetic analysis, you're going to have some characters which are rampantly homoplasious, and so useless for taxonomy. But you'll also have some characters, which are the ones you pray for, which, if you like, remain true to their clades and are therefore very useful for phylogenetic taxonomy. I'm going to illustrate an example of the latter kind of character, the good character, in Rudist bivalves, namely the internal shelly supports for the insertion of the adductor muscles, or myophores as they're called. A couple of examples of which are illustrated here in some more derived Rudists. And at this point I should perhaps remind more innocent members of the audience that yes, these are or were bivalves. Just remember that. Okay, to go back to the beginning of the story then, on the left-hand side we have an example there of Arctica, burrowing clam Arctica, and in the normal burrowing clams, the adductor muscles insert directly onto the inner surface of the shell, and during life the adductors kind of glide outwards. They follow a radial trajectory following the growth of the valve margin. And we have essentially the same arrangement in the primitive disrotid Rudists, such as Epidisrus you see on the right side of the picture there. The only difference being that here the muscle insertion, the posterior muscle insertion, is raised up on a projecting ledge, the myophore, which has the effect of shortening the length of the muscle, make sure it doesn't get too long. And then that muscle ledge disappears helicospirally beneath the hinge plate. And then we go on and look at the other Rudists, and we see quite a diversity of myophoral configurations. But the interesting thing about these is that from phylogenetic analysis, which has been done in the past, they do seem to be quite reliable as taxonomically diagnostic indicators. So, for example, we start at the top left-hand side with the primitive configuration I've just been talking about. Beneath that, we have a slightly more derived disserrated, where the posterior, both the adductor muscles have become much shorter. So now those myophoral ledges are raised up just to become ventral extensions of the hinge plates, but they're still more or less parallel with the commissural plane. The fun really starts when you get these more uncoiled tubular Rudists, such as we see down at the bottom left there, monochlora. And there the myophoral plates begin to, in the lower valve, begin to incline downwards into the valve interior. And that trend reaches its most extreme point in the radiolitidae, illustrated in the top right of the picture there, where the myophores of the left valve have rotated right round like that and face outwards onto the inner wall of the lower valve, the right valve, which is the lower valve. Hang on. Like that, okay? And then finally here we have another kind of rearrangement of the myophores in the Palaeontological. So we see quite a diversity of myophoral arrangements in Rudists. So to summarize the story so far, we have diverse arrangements of the myophores in Rudists, but they tend to be phylogenetically conservative once within families, once they've settled, if you like, and so they're very useful for systematic analysis. But then the obvious question arises, why? And for that we need to look at living bivalves. Now, remember the last time you ate an oyster, all done, I'm sure, and how tough they are to open. The muscle bonding to the shell in a living bivalve is extremely strong. But there seems to be a bit of a paradox here, because you can see on the right-hand side of the picture, as the shell gets bigger, the muscles track outwards across the inside of the shell. So how does it perform this trick of being really tight, the muscles being really tightly bonded to the inside of the shell, and yet during growth they can glide across the shell interior? Bit of a mystery, that one. So let's see if we can answer that. Here we need to go to some nice TEM work that was done in the 1970s, which demonstrated that the muscle anchorage is achieved, is mediated by a collagen mat known as the tendon sheath, which effectively glues the specialized epithelium that lies between the shell and the muscle to the shell surface. And on the right-hand side of the picture, you can, if we look closely at the tendon sheath, what we have here is a sample of the muscle shell attachment of a recent bivalve that has been embedded in epoxy. And then I have acid etched the myophores prisms to which the tendon sheath attaches, and you can see where I have etched away the myophores prisms. You can see little collagen fibers which go up from the tendon sheath into the myophores prism. So that's how the tendon sheath, and therefore the whole system, is anchored to the shell quite firmly. So, so far so good. That's how we get this very strong anchorage. But we now have the problem of how about this gliding during growth. So let's look how it achieves that. The important element in that part of the story are these things that look like some kind of musical notation, little hemidesmosomes. And they're like little Velcro tabs, which can actually which allow the muscle fibers serially to detach and reattach, and if you like, creep their way across the specialized epithelium. So the gliding is achieved by the muscle fiber, the connective tissue of the muscle fiber, creeping its way along the inner surface of the specialized epithelium. So that's how it does this curious trick of being very strongly bonded and yet being able to move during growth. Okay. Yeah. And we see exactly the same kind of growth trajectory as I mentioned before in the primitive rudists. But we do have the problem that where the tendon sheath is bonded to the shell, it severely limits the amount of shell growth normal to the shell surface. It's very hard for the myophores prisms to grow. So, is that a problem for the primitive rudists? Well, not really, because they have this spirogyral pattern of growth, and effectively the muscle just glides along that helicospiral track. No problem so far. The fun starts when we get to this process of ligamentary invagination in the uncoiled rudists, because, of course, now your shell growth increments are being stacked orthogonally. And if we take a section through where the myophore would be there, if the myophore was still flat, you can see the problem it would have growing in order to keep up with the shell rim, because, of course, we know that that's not allowed to grow in a normal sense, as shown there. So that is verboten. So how does it solve that problem? Well, very simply, by tilting the muscle attachment surface. And then, of course, it can keep up. It reachieves this gliding growth going up the inside of the valve. So this is why, essentially, we have this rotation of the myophores in Rudist, which it's an adaptation to get around the constraint of limited shell growth beneath muscle attachment. Right. Now, the thing is, there are different possibilities for rotating the myophores. And it seems what happens is that once a particular clade of uncoiled Rudist has, if you like, decided what kind of solution to this problem it's going to adopt, it's kind of seems to be built into its ontogenetic program and then remains as a reliable diagnostic character for the rest of that family's history. So, for example, I mentioned this earlier, the example there with monopleura, which gave rise to the first radiolitid, Angriopleura, which is completely uncoiled, and the solution in the radiolitids was, as I mentioned, for the two myophores to tilt down and face outwards onto the inside of the lower valve. We have an interesting distinction here, though, between, in another group, the superfamily Caprinoidea, we have two families there, Capriniloideidae, which are the ones on the left. They are almost entirely a New World family. And what happens with the Capriniloideidae is that the posterior myophore rotates outwards in a similar fashion to the radiolitids that we saw earlier. And so you have that kind of arrangement between the myophore of the left valve and the right valve in the surface. On the other hand, the largely old world caprinids, which are on the right side of the picture, do the opposite. There, the left valve posterior myophore tilts into the interior of the left valve, and it is the myophore of the right valve which tilts upwards. And so you get the completely opposite arrangement. And you have these two families, essentially New World and Old World, which remain forever after completely taxonomically distinct because of this difference in the way that the myophores have rotated. Finally, there are a few Rudists where it looks, you can see from the white arrows, as if we do have a rather flattish area of muscle insertion. But notice that it's ridged. And on the right-hand side is a lovely specimen of Vaccinites, which Murchison collected from Gossau with aragonite preservation. And if we look closely at what's happening in these flattish areas, the mystical prisms are arranged like so, which implies growth lines of that form. So in fact, the ridging is like a radiator grill, with the muscles still attaching down the sides of the radiator grill. So, conclusion is we have lots of different kinds of myophoral arrangements in Rudist. Once established, however, they remain taxonomically valid. And that is because of the mechanism that I explained about the attachment of the muscle to the shell. And, okay, that's essentially, that's a summary of the story. Oh, and so it's all down to muscles.